Thank you all for being here this morning. We have an almost full house. My name is Councillor Emily Lutz, and I am the chair of the Planning Advisory Committee. Today is Tuesday, February 11th, 2025, and it is 1 p.m. So we've called the meeting to order, and I'll begin this afternoon. I am still in the morning. That's been a day. This afternoon by taking roll call. So if everyone could please indicate on their electronic pin pads if they are present. For the record, I'd greatly appreciate it. Oh, mine didn't blink. I am here, but mine didn't blink, so I will make a note of that. I was waiting for it to start blinking at me. All right, we're all present with the exception of Kate Friars, one of our citizen members. At this point in the meeting, are there any amendments to the proposed agenda? Any amendments, additions, deletions, comments on the proposed agenda? I have no lights, seeing none, and look for a mover of the agenda. Moved by Deputy Mayor Peckford, seconded by Councillor Gates. Thank you. Any discussion on the motion to approve the agenda as circulated? Seeing none, call for the question. All those in favor or otherwise, please signify in the usual fashion. Are everyone else's blinking? Okay, so mine is not working. So I'll just, okay, it's fine. I'll indicate verbally that and I did press it even though it wasn't blinking, so I guess I don't get to vote this meeting. Darn. I'm in favor. So the motion carries unanimously. Thank you. At this point in the agenda, it has been approved. I'd look for anyone at this time to disclose any conflict of interest issues they may have with any items on the approved agenda. Are there any items of conflict? Seeing none, we had also circulated the minutes of our last Planning Advisory Committee, January 14th, 2025. I assume everyone's had a chance to review them. At this point, barring any errors or omissions, I would look for a motion to approve those minutes. Moved by Councillor Gates, seconded by Logan Morse. Thank you. Discussion on the minutes. Okay, seeing none, call the question. All in favor or otherwise, please indicate in the usual fashion. Motion carries unanimously, and I'm also in favor. Thank you, everyone. Is there any business arising from that set of minutes from any members of the Planning Advisory Committee? Seeing no business arising from those minutes, we will begin with our new business. Item 8A, application to rezone a property located on Prospect Road, PID 551999145, New Minas, from highway commercial C5 zone to the mixed commercial residential C3 zone. File number 24-10. Alice Jacob is the planner presenting on this item. Ms. Jacob, your microphone should be on, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is an application to rezone a vacant parcel located on Prospect Road, New Minas. And this is a standard process we follow for all rezoning applications. The first step is to receive a complete application, which we have received. And the second step is usually to hold a public information meeting in the community where the property is located. This meeting is to gather feedback from the concerned community. And the third step of the process is where staff usually review the application, and we also contact the various internal and external departments for their feedback on the application, and a staff report is then prepared, which is then presented to the Planning Advisory Committee. If a positive recommendation is made by the PAC, the application will be given a first reading by the Council, and the Council will forward the application to a public hearing. Soon after the public hearing, the application will go back to the Council for a second reading, at which point a decision will be made, and the decision will be advertised on our website, at which time a 14-day appeal period will begin for the application. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. So the County of Kings map, and the red circle on the map is the approximate location of the subject property within New Minas. And this is the subject property. The property is about 5.5 acres. The access to the property is from Prospect Road. There are no existing structures or buildings on the property. There's vegetation covering most of it. And to the south of the property, we have Highway 101. The neighboring properties to the east and west are mostly residential uses. And to the north, we have a few commercial uses. That's where the Kent Building Supplies is located in New Minas. And there are a few more commercial uses further east on Prospect Road. The applicant acquired the subject property in 2022. And the proposal is to build multi-unit dwellings on the property for a total of 121 units. The reason for the rezoning is the property is located within a zone called the Highway Commercial Zone, and the Highway Commercial Zone does not permit residential uses as of right. So the proposal is to rezone the property to the mixed commercial residential C3 zone, which would enable the proposed development. And this is a very rough sketch of the site plan. So the plan is to develop the multi-unit dwellings in two different phases. So the first phase will, So the initial focus will be on the front portion of the property, where the applicant is proposing about 3 to 4 multi-unit dwellings containing 32 to 40 units. The development will begin with the construction of 2 8-unit dwellings initially, and the remaining units will be developed in phase 2 on the rear portion of the property. So the current plan, as I mentioned, is for 121 units. However, the rezoning could permit up to 135 units on the subject property. But there are a few factors impacting this number. So the yellow strips that we see on the site plan are 2 66-foot wide Nova Scotia Power easements where construction won't be possible. They might be able to put in landscaping and parking or any other temporary things, but nothing permanent would be possible on those yellow strips. And then there's also Highway 101 to the south. So the Department of Public Works requires a 10-meter setback from the highway right-of-way. And the proposal will also have to comply with all the other requirements of the new zone for multi-unit dwellings, such as amenity space requirements, solid waste storage requirements, parking, and all the other requirements. So it might impact the final number of units on the property. And this is the zoning map of the area. As we can see here, the property is within the Highway Commercial C5 zone, and the neighboring properties are all within the same zone as well. There is a C3 zone here, which is the proposed zone for the subject property. This parcel was recently rezoned. So the C5 zone is mostly for commercial uses that serve the traveling public and that are not desired within main commercial street areas, and also uses that benefit from direct access to major transportation routes. The C3 zone permits both residential and non-residential uses, so it permits a variety of residential uses and lower impact commercial uses. And then we have the O1 zone here, which is the environmental constraint zone, which restricts development, and the C6 zone, which enables the development of large-scale business areas. And we also have the commercial recreation here, which is for campgrounds, golf courses, gun ranges, and drive-in theaters, and a few other uses. And there's also the A4 zone, which is a country residential zone, which is meant for low-density residential development in predominantly agricultural areas. And this is the future land use. The property is expected to continue to be in the commercial designation. And these are some of the photographs of the subject property. Here's a key map for reference. This image shows the existing access to the subject property from Prospect Road. And this is a view from the axis looking north. So this area with the vegetation is within the environmental constraint O1 zone. And this is a view from the axis looking west, and the image to the right is a view from, again, the view from the axis looking east of Prospect Road. And these images are of the central portion of the property, which, as you can see, is mostly covered in vegetation. And I believe this is the area of the Nova Scotia Power easement. This is the rear portion of the property. So beyond this vegetation, there is Highway 101. A public information meeting was held for this application last year in July in the New Minas Fire Hall. We had 2 village commissioners and 1 member of the public present. The member of the public was supportive of the proposal and expressed the opinion that more housing is required in the region, but concerns were expressed regarding the lengthy processing times. And we've had some amendments made to our planning policy. As a result, if an application for a property, if a property is located within a village, we are required to present that application to the respective village commission. So this application was presented to the New Minas Village Commission on December 9 last year. The commissioners did not indicate any concerns. They just provided feedback to the applicant regarding getting connected to sewer and water infrastructure at the time of permitting, for consideration at the time of permitting. And this is a policy from the municipal planning strategy that enables this rezoning. This policy enables council to consider rezoning land from one zone enabled within a designation to another enabled within the same designation. And these are all the zones enabled within the commercial designation, and criteria A directs us to policy 3.2.2, which is this policy. As you can see here, both the current zone, which is the highway commercial C5 zone, and the proposed C3 zone are listed within this policy. As a result, council is able to consider this rezoning. And this is an additional policy that applies to all rezoning applications. The first criteria of the policy, we usually check if the intent of the proposed zone, in this case the C3 zone, is being met through this rezoning, whether it would be appropriate to place the proposed C3 zone on the subject property. And this is the intent of the C3 zone, which states lands located in the zone are intended to complement established commercial areas. These areas shall generally be located on main transportation corridors and associated side streets that have commercial development. Traditional main street areas within commercial areas that have not yet experienced much development, or areas where flexibility between residential and commercial uses is desired, and to permit both residential and lower impact commercial uses such as local retail or business offices in the same area of a growth center. So with regards to that, again going back to the zoning map, the subject property, this is a subject property, and as you can see, the surrounding properties are all within the C5 zone, which is the highway commercial zone. The C5 zone is intended for commercial development, but if we look at the image to the right, although this is the C5 zone, most of the properties within the zone is currently developed with residential uses. So it is a commercial area that has not yet experienced much commercial development. And as I mentioned earlier, the proposed zone, which is a C3 zone, permits a variety of residential uses, and it also permits lower impact commercial uses. So placing the C3 zone on the subject property would acknowledge the existing residential uses in the area, and the uses permitted within the C3 zone would also be compatible with the surrounding land uses. And also it would complement the established commercial areas to further east of Prospect Road, and it will also complement the commercial uses found on the New Minas Commercial Street, which is about 3 to 4 minute drive from the subject property. And criteria B of the policy is about the impacts, whether the impacts of the proposed development and the permitted uses within the proposed C3 zone would be acceptable. So the proposed zone, which is the C3 zone, as I mentioned previously, permits a variety of residential uses and also permits lower impact commercial uses like retail stores, restaurants, personal service shops, business offices, and a few other uses. The current zoning, which is the highway commercial zone, usually permits uses that are considered higher impact, such as automotive sales, repair, gas bars, bus stations, and a few other uses. So we are kind of switching from a higher impact zone to a lower impact zone. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a predominantly residential area. The C3 zone and the permitted uses within the C3 zone would be compatible with the surrounding uses in the area. And then there's criteria C of the policy, which is the general policies. So these are the various criteria within the general policy that applies to this application. The application was found to be consistent with the intent of the municipal planning strategy. The proposal does not conflict with any municipal or provincial programs, bylaws, or regulations. There is no financial impact on the municipality because of the proposal. And there is no land compatibility issues either. The property is within proximity to schools, recreation, and other community facilities. And the school board, we did consult with the school board regarding the proposal, and they did not indicate any concerns. And we also contacted the Department of Public Works for their input on traffic and access and egress, and they did not indicate any concerns. The New Minas Fire Chief has confirmed the adequacy of fire protection services and equipment. There are no concerns with regards to sewer or water services. With regards to flooding and serious drainage, the applicant will be required to submit a drainage plan at the time of permitting, at which point the drainage will be reviewed. And we do not have any concerns regarding site suitability. So again, coming back to the process, the public information meeting was held in July last year, and we are currently at the Planning Advisory Committee meeting. If the committee forwards a positive recommendation to the council will give the application a first reading and then forward it to a public hearing. Soon after the public hearing, there will be a second reading and a decision will be made on the application, which will be advertised on the website, and a 14-day appeal period will begin. So staff, based on our review, staff are forwarding a positive recommendation, and this is the recommendation to the Planning Advisory Committee. That concludes my presentation. Pass it back to the chair.
Thank you very much, Alice. Okay, are there questions this afternoon? It is after lunch, afternoon. Councillor Gates.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, just for clarification, usually when we have a fairly large development, are there any thoughts given to walking for sidewalks in this particular area? There would be fairly high traffic, but I didn't see any, and also for lights, for lighting the development.
Go ahead.
Through you, Madam Chair. With regards to sidewalks, there is a map that identifies areas that, like a sidewalk priority map that identifies a few areas within the municipality, but I don't believe this is within the priority area, but I think Laura would be able to explain that better.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Gates. I haven't checked the sidewalk priority map for this area, but my guess would also be that this is not outlined as a priority. However, while this is a larger development, that's typically not the trigger for the installation of things like sidewalks and streetlights and things like that. So at this time, that's not something we've considered.
Councillor, I'll come back to you for a second. Councillor Gates. Trish has her light on. Oh, active microphone number reached. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to also add that the added, I hesitate to use the word complication, but the added issue with this particular property is that sidewalks would be the responsibility of the Village of New Minas as well. So while the municipality may identify priorities, the village would ultimately decide where they put the sidewalks and ultimately where their priority would also be.
Okay, Councillor Gates, any further follow-up?
That kind of just addresses it, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, thank you very much for the presentation. A question that I posed in the past, and I'm just not fully understanding. In my perspective, this looks like a high-intensity residential request, of which we tend to be getting a lot as of late. And I'm wondering about quality of living. And what I mean by that is, if there is a new 121 unit development happening in New Minas up near the 101, does the developer not have some type of obligation to create a small green space, a small park, a playground for children? If I'm not mistaken, years ago, I don't know if it's still the case, and perhaps someone can let me know, but when people built subdivisions, there was always a requirement to have a green space or a small park or something within a subdivision to ensure some type of respite or quality of life for people living there. Now that we're getting a number of requests for these high-intensity living areas, larger buildings, does it not make sense that we also look at the quality of living for the future residents of this space? And is there a requirement for the developer to look at some type of amenity for the residents, or if not, should there not be? Thank you.
True, sorry.
Thank you. So I have both my left and right flipping furiously through their documents, and then I have Ms. Jacobs already ready to present. So who would like to handle this one? Laura? Okay, Laura has offered.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor McPherson. So you said the magic word, which is subdivision. So that's the trigger for open space. That triggers open space dedication to the municipality, so lands that would be owned by the municipality. However, for an R4 zoned property, which is, so I know that we're contemplating a rezoning to C3, but when you look in the bylaw, the C3 zone for multi-unit development points to, depending on the size of the building, either the R3 or R4 zone, and both of those zones require amenity spaces for buildings that contain more than 5 units. So we do require either 100 square feet of amenity space per unit or 10% of the lot area, whichever is greater. And I've not seen one yet that the 100 was the greater of the two. So 10% of that lot area will be required to be green space. I would also point out, I didn't catch, but did you show the map showing the power line easements?
I did.
So within those easements, buildings cannot be constructed. So in a way, this applicant has his open space built in. He doesn't have to give up developable land to provide an amenity space for his residents. So yes, that is an expectation. Yeah, so either through subdivision, which gets dedicated to us, either in the form of land or cash, and the cash can only be used to purchase land for open space, or in the case of an R3 or R4 development, or in this case a C3, then amenity space needs to be provided.
Does that answer it? Everything? Anything? Any follow-up?
Just a brief comment follow-up. Thank you very much for that information. It's important. Once again, I just see the nature of housing with increased populations as maybe changing a little bit in Kings County as of late, and we're seeing more requests for larger buildings with more units, basically all over the municipality. And along with that, I think we do have an obligation to ensure that we take advantage of the opportunity to get small playgrounds, small parks, sitting areas around quality of life. And what I'm sensing from the reply is, depending on the zoning of the property, some of those amenities are required and sometimes not. So something I'd like to know more about as we move forward, and I'm anticipating a lot of education in the near future around land use bylaws and planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Trish here. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one follow-up and clarification. Amenity space, by definition under the land use bylaw, is not necessarily going to be green space. It does qualify to use balconies, perhaps an indoor area that's jointly used, like a gym. There are options available to the developer that we acknowledge as meeting our definition of amenity. It may not necessarily be a playground.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from members of PAC? I have one. This parcel of land falls within the New Minas secondary planning strategy? It does, right? Yeah.
It does.
Okay. Was there anything about that document that informed the way that this rezoning unfolded, or is it just sort of par for the course under that set of regulations?
Through you, Madam Chair, to you. The only thing I could think of is the sewer and water related policy, which I have covered in the report, I believe. There isn't anything that I can think of other than that, maybe.
I was reminded when Councillor Gates asked about pedestrian infrastructure that one of the visions of the New Minas secondary plan was to have a pedestrian loop essentially that would come up to that intersection. Ms. Mosier.
Through you, Madam Chair, to you. There is language in the secondary plan around housing for all ages and stages of life, and so we would sort of see this as meeting that initiative as well, providing apartment units for both people who might just be starting out in adulthood as well as those who may be downsizing later in life.
Okay, perfect. And one follow-up, if I could. So there's nothing about this application that would restrict it to just young families or just seniors. It's an all, anyone is welcome type of development?
We are not able to limit occupancy on the basis of some person, whether it's age or from a human rights standpoint. So we can't, through our regulations, dictate who is going to live anywhere. Really.
Yeah, okay, perfect. And sort of the reason I ask is one of the things I heard on the doorsteps was a desire to see less demographic specific developments in Kings County, like less cul-de-sacs with the seniors duplexes that are 55 plus, because it leads to sort of a homogenous community where there's no school bus and kids walking on the street, and that there was that desire to sort of get away to that. So I was curious whether or not how this sort of played into that, but I recognize we can't regulate that, but more curiosity, I think. Councillor Gates.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One other thing I might like to see in some of these applications, such as this one, does it fall within the King's Transit traveled area? It might be something we add to the whole package. Thank you.
So is there anything within our planning documents that considers whether or not a development is on a public transit route? I think where public transit routes change all the time, that would be, you know, it's not always static, but do we ever consider it, Ms. Mosier?
Through you to you, we focus more on main transportation routes with the recognition that bus routes are generally going to be along main transportation routes because that's where people want to go. But at this time, it's not in King's Transit's route map. No.
Okay. And just another point on that is a little known fact about King's Transit is that you can actually get on the bus basically anywhere. If it's driving by and you wave it, it will pull over for you. So if the bus travels along that, and that is their policy, I'm pretty sure that they will stop for you at any point. So as long as the bus goes along that road, it is essentially on the route and you don't need a bus stop to get on. Yeah. Which is cool. I've never tried it, but. Anything else on this development? Okay. So we have a motion, which it's already up there. Thank you. That the Planning Advisory Committee recommends that Municipal Council give first reading to hold a public hearing regarding the application to rezone a vacant property located on Prospect Road, PID 55199-145, New Minas, from the Highway Commercial C5 zone to the Mixed Commercial Residential C3 zone, as described in Appendix D of the report dated February 11th, 2025. I have a mover of this motion, moved by Councillor McPherson, seconded by Deputy Mayor Peckford. Thank you both. Any discussion on the motion now that it has been moved and seconded? So I'll just refer everyone back to that little graph that Alice showed us at the beginning of her presentation, that this then goes to council for first reading and then a public hearing, which the public is invited to give their comment on, and then second reading, which is ultimately the final piece of the puzzle, and then it's approved. So we're moving along this process. All right. Are you ready? Councillor Gates looks very ready. He's like, hurry up. All in favor or otherwise, please signify now. Oh, thank you, Alice. And I will vote in favor, despite my button not working today. All right, motion carries unanimously. Thank you. So next we have item 8B. Application, it's very similar, to rezone the property located at 5329 Prospect Road, PID 55199-129, New Minas, from the Highway Commercial C5 zone to the Mixed Commercial Residential C3 zone, file 24-18. And back to you, Alice. Thank you. Your mic's on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is a similar application as the previous one. It's again located on Prospect Road, New Minas, really close to the other property. And this is the process again. The first step is to receive a complete application. The second step is a public information meeting. And the third step is a staff review. And then the staff report goes to the Planning Advisory Committee for the committee's recommendation. And if it is if they forward it to the council, council will give the application a first reading and then forward it to a public hearing. Soon after the public hearing, there's a second reading where a final decision is made on the application, which will be advertised on the website, at which point a 14-day appeal period will begin. And the County of Kings map, and again this is the location of the subject property within New Minas. And this is our subject property, which is approximately 1 acre. The access again is from Prospect Road. The property has the property has a brook, the Elderkin Brook, which runs through the rear portion of the property. I will get into the details of that in the coming slides. There are no existing structures on the property, so this map is from I think this map is from 2021, and it's not the most updated one, so we do see a few things here, but currently the property has no structures or buildings on it. But this is how the property used to look like under the previous ownership. So there was a mobile home and 2 accessory structures on the property. And the previous property owner performed automotive repair on the property. So there were a lot of salvage waste stored on the property. Both the municipality and Nova Scotia Environment had received complaints about unsightly premises. And then with regards to the neighboring uses, similar to the previous application, it's mostly residential dwellings. So the property, the applicant acquired the subject property in 2023. So soon after purchase, the applicant demolished the existing structures and cleared all the salvage and waste from the property. The proposal is to build multi-unit dwelling or dwellings on the subject property. Again, the property is within the highway commercial zone, which does not permit residential uses as of right. So the proposal is to rezone the property to the mixed commercial residential C3 zone to enable the proposed multi-unit dwellings. And we have the zoning map here. The property is within the C5 zone and is proposed to be rezoned to the C3. We have a C3 zone property here, which I mentioned was recently rezoned. The C5 zone is for commercial uses that usually serve the traveling public. And then we have the O1 zone, which is the environmental constraint zone where development is restricted, and the A4 zone, the country residential zone, which is for lower density residential neighborhoods, and the C3 zone, which is for both residential and commercial uses. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on, but okay. So based on the area of the subject property and based on the requirements of the proposed area requirements of the proposed zone, the property could have up to 25 units, residential units, but this might not be possible because of a few constraints. As I mentioned, the Elderkin Brook passes through portions of the property. And the land use bylaw requires a 50 feet setback from water courses, and the area around the brook has steep slope, so it's like a sharp drop to the brook, and I don't believe that portion could be used for development, but I might be wrong. But then there is also the environmentally sensitive area overlay, which is this hatched portion on the property. So as I mentioned in my previous presentations, the ESA is like an additional layer that applies on top of the zoning. It is usually applied to areas that are prone to flooding or areas where there are steep slope. In this case, it would be steep slope. So the any new additions or any expansion on this portion would require engineer review requirements. It has to address the sensitive feature of this portion. Sorry, I lost track. And then the proposed development will also have to meet the additional requirements for multi-unit dwellings. So if the applicant builds a multi-unit dwelling with 5 or more units, it would have to meet the requirements like amenity spaces requirements, the parking space requirements, and also the various other requirements within the land use bylaw. So it is unlikely that 25 units would be possible on the property because of all these constraints. And moving on to some of the photographs. This is the portion of the property where the previous development existed, where the mobile home and accessory structures were. And this is the area to the rear. This is the area where the brook passes through, and this is where the steep slope also exists, although it's not visible in this image. And this is the view from the axis looking east, and this is the view from the axis looking west. And this is the neighboring property to the north across Prospect Road. And this is the western portion of the property here. Again, there's the brook here, and there's also like a sharp drop, which is a steep slope. And sorry, this is the neighboring residential dwelling to the west. So a public information meeting was not required for this application because according to our policies, public information meetings are only required for rezoning a land that measures more than an acre. So this property is approximately an acre, so a public information meeting was not required. However, we received a phone call from one of the neighbors, and she had questions about the maximum number of units that could be built on the property, and also had concerns regarding garbage and debris being dumped on the property. But this was passed on to the building and enforcement team to investigate. And again, this application was also presented to the New Minas Village Commission on December 9th. The commissioners had some questions of clarification about the number of units possible, and they also had questions about the previous state of the property and whether there had been any environmental impacts. Staff investigated this further, and we reached out to the Department of Environment. They had received a complaint about the unsightly premises on the property, but that complaint was closed soon after, a few months after the complaint was received, I believe in April 2016. And the village commissioners also provided feedback to the applicant about getting connected to sewer and water infrastructure. And this is a policy again from the MPS that enables this rezoning. The policy enables council to consider rezoning land from one zone enabled in a designation to another enabled within the same designation. And these are all the zones enabled within the commercial designation, and criteria A directs to policy 3.2.2, which is this policy. Again, both the highway commercial zone and the mixed commercial zone are listed within the policy. As a result, council is able to consider rezoning. And this is the additional policy that applies to all rezoning applications. The criteria A of the policy is about the zone placement. And again, this is the zone placement policy, which states lands located in the zone are intended to complement established commercial areas. These areas shall generally be located on main transportation corridors and associated side streets that have commercial development. Traditional main street areas within commercial areas that have not yet experienced much development, or areas where flexibility between residential and commercial uses is desired, and to permit both residential and lower impact commercial uses such as local retail or business offices in the same area of a growth center. So this is the zoning of the area. As we can see here, the subject property, which is this, and most of the properties, neighboring properties, are within the C5 zone, which is intended for commercial development. And this is the A4 zone, or the country residential zone. This zone is intended for low density residential neighborhoods. So this property is located in an area that kind of transitions from a commercial to a residential zone. And as I mentioned in the previous, with regards to the previous application, the C3 zone is meant for, is to offer flexibility in terms of development. Like, it permits both residential, a variety of residential uses, and also non-residential uses, which are lower impact commercial uses. Placing the C3 zone here would be, would act as a good transition between the C5 and the country residential A4 zone. And it would be consistent with the intent of the C3 zone. And with regards to the impact, again, the mixed commercial residential, the proposed zone permits all forms of residential units, uses, and also so a lot of other lower impact commercial uses. And the current zone, which is the highway commercial zone, permits uses that are usually considered higher impact. So considering that the area is currently residential in nature, and the C3 zone, the uses permitted within the C3 zone would be compatible with the surrounding uses in the area. And again, the general policies, criteria C directs us to general policies. We did review the application against the relevant criteria within this policy. The application was found to be consistent with the intent of the municipal planning strategy. There are no conflicts with any municipal or provincial programs, bylaws, or regulations. There is no financial impact on the municipality because of the proposal. There are no issues with regards to land use compatibility. The property is within proximity to schools, recreation, and other community facilities. The Department of Public Works did not indicate any issues, concerns with regards to traffic, access, or egress. The New Minas Fire Chief confirmed the adequacy of fire protection services. With regards to sewer and water services, the Village of New Minas confirmed that there are sewer and water lines on Prospect Road, which the property could be connected to. And with regards to flooding and serious drainage issues, so as I mentioned earlier, the majority of the property is within the environmentally sensitive area overlay. So a report is required to be submitted at the stage of permitting, and this report will be required to address the drainage as well. And with regards to potential for soil erosion and siltation, the property owner will be required to follow the provincial soil erosion controls during any construction, which is enforced by Nova Scotia Environment. And with regards to site suitability, we did reach out to Nova Scotia Environment regarding the proximity to the watercourse, but they did not provide a response. The property, as I mentioned earlier, the land use bylaw requires a 50 feet setback from watercourses, so the proposal will have to comply with that requirement. And it will also have to comply with all the additional requirements of the environmentally sensitive area overlay. Again, back to the process. As I mentioned earlier, a public information meeting was not required for this application. The staff report was included in the PAC agenda package. We are currently at the Planning Advisory Committee. And if a positive recommendation is made by the committee, the application will go to the council for a first reading. And the council will forward the application to a public hearing. Properties within 500 feet will be notified of the public hearing, and the public hearing will also be advertised on the website and on social media sites. Soon after the public hearing, there will be a second reading, at which point council will make a decision, and this decision will be advertised on our website, at which time a 14-day appeal period will begin for the application. So based on our review, staff are forwarding a positive recommendation to the Planning Advisory Committee. That concludes my presentation. I pass it back to the chair.
Thank you, Alice. Are there any questions on this presentation? Councillor Gates?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for clarification, on the ESA section of this lot, can that be considered for parking?
Through you, Madam Chair, the only requirement that I can think of within the ESA is something that applies to buildings. So if anything new is being constructed on the ESA or any expansion is being done on the ESA with regards to building or construction, then it would have to address the sensitive feature of that portion, and it has to be designed by a licensed engineer. So it does not, I don't think that would apply to parking, which is actually temporary, or to landscaping or any other. You could even have driveway on it, like anything temporary would be fine, I'm assuming.
I'm going to go to Trish, as she has her lid on as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to clarify, so Alice is correct that the SA doesn't prohibit uses, but it allows us to step in design requirements should they be looking to alter the land in any way. So parking in an ESA, fine. This particular one, I believe, is an ESA because of steep slope. So by definition, they're going to have to fill it to make it usable for parking. We would require an engineer to assist in that fill to ensure that it's done with adjacent property in mind, the current property, flooding, like all of that would come into that concern that we would have.
Okay, thanks, Trish. Does that answer your question, Councillor? You good? Okay. Mr. Deal, go ahead.
Through the chair, I believe you mentioned a 50-foot setback. And does that apply to the steep slope and the water course, or to both, like for the structures to be built on the site? So does that apply to the edge of the steep slope or from the actual water course for the 50-foot setback?
Through you, Madam Chair, my understanding is that it would apply from the water course, the edge of the water course. So the 50-foot would be from here to whatever the 50-foot is. It's not from the top of the slope, if I've understood that right. Yeah. Does that make sense?
I see agreement from
Is-
these two.
Yeah, so the steep slope,
You're on. Yep.
the top of the steep slope has no setback requirement from that. You can build up to the edge of it, or how does that apply?
So the land use bylaw speaks to having a requirement that have a separation distance of at least 50 feet from the edge of the bank of the water course. So you're right, it would, depending on the slope of the bank, each situation would be different, but really the bank itself would not be part of the 50, it would be down at the bottom because that's where the water course is. So that initial edge of the water is really where we're starting. So it's not 50 feet going up, it's a horizontal 50.
So would there be any if there was no water course, would there be any setback then from the top of a steep slope? Or do you build right at the edge of a steep slope? I thought there was some sort of a setback requirement from the top of a steep slope.
Through you, Madam Chair, there is a requirement in a different section that talks about if it's a steep slope, even if we've not identified it as an ESA, there's a ratio of how far back you need to be, just from a safety and design perspective. I believe it's 1-to-2 ratio, so it is something that we take into consideration.
Thank you.
Okay. Good question. Thank you, Mr. Deal. Councillor McPherson, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Through you. So my understanding is there's about an acre of property here. It has a brook running across the top of it. It has some steep slopes on it. We're not sure in the proposal of the number of units that potentially could be going there. We know that it is in an environmentally sensitive area. I think I'm understanding that even if at the end of the day the property was rezoned to a mixed commercial residential use, that there are still parameters around environment that must be followed before the developer could construct to ensure that the environmentally sensitive aspects of it were adhered to. Is that my understanding? I'm getting red flags evidently about the potential for flooding with that river, with that brook running across the top of it. Just wanting to ensure, I guess, that by rezoning, it doesn't give carte blanche to do what you want there. There is another aspect about the environmental piece that must be adhered to before any construction could actually take place. Is that accurate?
Trish?
Thank you, Madam Chair. through you to the councillor, yes and no. So there's sort of a multiple layers of involvement there. So the land use bylaw, we're going to step in where we can with setbacks. If there's an ESA in a given property, we'll step in there. When it comes to flooding, while I don't think that's technically an issue on this property because of topography, it's more downstream concerns. Flooding still remains a civil matter. So Department of Environment, under their regulations, regulate that a property can't negatively affect another property. So pre-design, water leaving the property needs to be the same post-development, which can be difficult if you're not involving an engineer to ensure that. So long story short, we'll have some say in it, but the onus will still be on any particular developer to ensure that they're not negatively affecting down or adjacent properties or downstream.
Councilor McPherson, follow up?
Thank you for that. So we'll have some say. Basically, if we decide to rezone, then we are basically out of the way. And if there is an issue, for example, if there is an issue with change or impact on surrounding properties, where does the landowner go with the concerns? Back to the municipality or somewhere else?
Do you want Ms. Mosher? Ms. Mosher's got her light on as well. Oh, so many microphones. All right, I'm gonna do this. Here we go. Okay, now you're both on.
Thanks. I'll take a stab first, and Trish can fill in any blanks I leave. So through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor McPherson, I see where you're coming from, but this property currently has zoning that enables development that can proceed as of right. I know that because these things come before you, you come up with questions and everything, but in the absence of this rezoning, development can still occur on this site. The applications are not intended to be seen, as I know you know, but as much for the public as for the committee. Development, this is not a question of, is the application enabling development where there was no development permitted before? No, there is development that is permitted now, and we would not step in for any of those as of right developments. It's only because this is going through a public process to change the zone that these questions are coming up. So I think that's always something important to remember, and to be honest, I fall into that trap too. So yeah, the question was about drainage. So the drainage still remains a civil matter, fortunately or unfortunately.
Follow up, Councilor McPherson?
Thank you.
Okay. All right. I had a question if PAC would permit. And again, just going back to pedestrian infrastructure in this area, because if this is, I guess, speaking of traps, it's easy to fall into this thinking of, well, we have two applications in a very similar location that are both proposing, potential multi-unit dwellings and lots of growth in this one area. And then I'm looking on my map and I see that, the sidewalk to downtown New Minas ends at Highbury Road and there's sort of an informal path that goes up along the side of the edge to where the trailer park starts, and then nothing towards Irving. So we sort of have a lack of pedestrian infrastructure coming up from Highbury Road, and then certainly nothing at that intersection that is with Prospect Road and the highway connector. So I really do feel, and I'm thinking about in 5 years, should these developments proceed and we have a beautiful new community growing here, well, not new, but new folks coming and enhancing the beautiful community that's already there. That's very valuable. That they're calling their next counselor and saying, where's my sidewalk? I want to get into town. Where's my crosswalk? It's too dangerous. And, I represent Highbury School Road, and there's people there on that road, which is, you know, quite a bit further and on the other side of the highway, that have been requesting since I started in this role, pedestrian access from Highbury School Road down under the overpass and then onto Prospect Road headed towards New Minas. So I know it is a community ask. It's a very awkward place to have community infrastructure. And so I see Trish has her light on. I don't know if you have a comment related to that comment, but I wonder if there's a process that we can undertake with the Village of New Minas to say, you know, this is sort of on the edge of the jurisdiction of the village. The folks living in the county would like pedestrian access. If this is something you could put in your capital plan. I don't know. Trish.
Not directly answering that question, but in terms of when we look at multi-unit developments, both the R3 and the R4 zones speak to pedestrian pathways within properties. So as Ms. Mosier had pointed out, in both the applications that we're looking at today, in both cases, those provisions are going to kick in. The downside to that is in the R3 and R4 zones, they speak to requiring internal pathways for a property if they're connecting to an existing sidewalk. So chicken and the egg, for sure. So while we can't force a developer to think about internal walkability, we'll certainly encourage that as part of their design, and hopefully the developers are hearing that, so that when we do, or when the village does extend a sidewalk out there, their development will feed into that in a nice, orderly manner. So it's always that issue of, do you require a sidewalk to nowhere, or do you prepare and design based on someday I want to think about my tenants that are going to walk down the hill to the sidewalk and have that already pre-thought out. So certainly those are discussions that we hope developers will take into consideration when they're doing their site design.
Okay.
But I can't force it at this point because there is not a sidewalk.
Understood.
Okay.
Thank you. And that's potentially something that if this proceeds to council, it can be addressed through the sidewalk priority list and a request at that time. So we'll leave it there, but I guess it's on the record now as we move forward because it's coming back. We'll see it again should we pass the recommendation today. All right, anything further on this application? Okay, we have a motion that reads, the Planning Advisory Committee recommends that Municipal Council give first reading to and hold a public hearing regarding the application to rezone the property located at 5329 Prospect Road, PID 5519929, New Minas, from the Highway Commercial C5 zone to the Mixed Commercial Residential C3 zone, as described in Appendix D of the report dated February 11th, 2025. Do we have a mover of the motion? Moved by Logan Morse, seconded by Deputy Mayor Riley Peckford. Any discussion on the motion? Sorry, Riley. I see no discussion. All in favor or otherwise, please signify in the usual fashion. I will be in favor. Councillor Gates, you're in favor? Okay, and I'm in favor. It's okay. It's how it happens. So the motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Is there any other business to come before Planning Advisory today? Any other business? Okay. Is there any comments from the public today? You're welcome to come up to the microphone and you can essentially say anything you want. You've got 5 minutes. It's comments, it doesn't say. Okay, I see no one coming forward. Last call? Okay. The date of the next meeting is March 11th, 2024. I will have to give my regrets at this time. I will be in Quebec City for a national annual general meeting that I am required to be at. Therefore, you're up, Deputy Mayor, as the Vice Chair of the Planning Advisory Committee. So you have my regrets in advance. All right. Anything else? I'd like a motion to adjourn. Deputy Mayor? Counselor Gates, thank you. All in favor or otherwise, please signify now. No, I'm waiting to vote, but it's very, I don't know. I vote in favor. Motion carries unanimously. I think, Counselor Gates, you and I are both having troubles today. We're adjourned. Thank you so much, and thanks to staff for all your work on all the files presented to us today, and thank you to PAC members for being here, and you folks for listening in the public. Good to have you. Have a great afternoon.